Open the map on your phone and imagine how many people are alive right now. 8 billion faces, spread across every continent, speaking thousands of languages, wearing every shade of skin the sun has ever painted. It feels like humanity has always been this vast, a crowded species pressing against the edges of the world. But the real answer is far stranger, because there was a time, not so long ago in the life of your kind, when almost all of you were gone, when the entire future of the human race could have fit inside a single small town, when you and everyone you have ever loved hung by a thread so thin it would have snapped. You are not the product of a mighty, unbroken lineage. You are the survivor of near extinction. And the story of how you got here is the most important story your ancestors never told you. Start with a simple fact that sounds impossible. Reach back far enough, and every single human being alive today, all 8 billion, traces back to the same tiny handful of survivors. Not a great crowd, not a proud nation, a group so small you could have gathered them in one place and counted every face. How can that be? Look at the differences between people. The distance between a family in Iceland and a family in the highlands of Peru, in Tokyo, in Congo. Surely those roots run deep, splitting off tens of thousands of generations ago into separate rivers. But they don't. Here's the truth that shocked the scientists who first found it. Every human on Earth is startlingly, almost eerily similar in their DNA. Take 2 chimpanzees from neighboring forests, and they can carry more genetic difference between them than 2 humans plucked from opposite sides of the planet. 8 billion of you, and barely any variety at all. That is not what a large ancient population looks like. That is what happens when a species almost dies. To understand why, you have to understand a single brutal idea. Scientists call it a population bottleneck. Picture your whole species as sand poured through the narrow neck of an hourglass. Before the neck, a wide, diverse crowd. But something happens, a disaster, a slow starvation, a changing world, and only a thin trickle makes it through to the other side. Everyone alive after the bottleneck is descended from that trickle. All the variety in the wide part above is simply gone, forever. And your ancestors went through the neck more than once. The first clue came from an unlikely place hidden inside a part of you passed down almost unchanged from mother to child. It's the mitochondria, the tiny engines that power every cell in your body, carry their own small loop of DNA, and it's handed down only through the female line. Your mother's mother's mother, back and back, a chain of women stretching into the dark. In the 1980s, a team of scientists, Rebecca Kahn, Mark Stoneking, and Alan Wilson, followed that chain backward. They compared this maternal DNA from people all over the world, and what they found stunned everyone. Every living human's maternal line converged on a single woman, one woman who lived in Africa somewhere around 150-200,000 years ago. They gave her a name that spread around the world, Mitochondrial Eve. Now be careful here, because the name misleads people. She was not the only woman alive in her time. She was not a lonely first mother in an empty world. She lived among many others, but she's the only one whose unbroken chain of daughters reaches all the way to the present without a single generation missing a girl. Everyone else's maternal line eventually hit a generation with only sons, and the thread went quiet. Hers did not, and so every human alive carries a whisper of her inside every cell. Sit with that for a moment. One woman, and through her, a hidden bottleneck begins to show itself. Because if you can trace all of humanity back to so few threads, it means the crowd your ancestors came from was never really a crowd at all. It was small, terrifyingly small, and it kept getting smaller. For years, scientists debated just how small. Then in 2023, a team of researchers led by Wang Jihu and Li Haipeng published something that made the world shut up. They had built a new method to read the deep past directly out of modern human DNA, a way to count how many people were alive hundreds of thousands of years ago, just from genetic echoes left in you today. And what their numbers said was almost unbelievable. Around 900,000 years ago, long before your species even existed in its modern form, your ancestors nearly vanished. The breeding population, the adults actually having children, may have collapsed to somewhere near 1,280 individuals. Not 1,000 villages, not 1,000 tribes, roughly 1,000 people total, carrying the entire future of humankind on their backs. And they stayed that small, teetering on the edge of oblivion for 100,000 years. Think about what that means. For a stretch of time longer than the modern humans have ever existed, your entire lineage was a single, struggling band, no bigger than the crowd at a small concert, wandering an enormous and hostile world. One bad drought, one long winter, one disease sweeping through. Any of it could have ended everything. There would be no cities, no languages, no you, just a fossil no one would ever find. Why did they shrink so far? The evidence points to a world turning against them, a brutal age of shifting climate, collapsing food supplies, and long, punishing cold. The planet simply stopped being kind, and your ancestors, a small, clever animal with no claws and no armor, were nearly erased. For 100,000 years, almost nothing changed. Almost no one was born who wasn't the child of that same shrinking band. The genetic record of that age is nearly a blank, a long silence in the story of your species, because there were so few people left to leave a mark at all. Whole chapters of your family history simply do not exist, not because they were lost, but because there was hardly anyone to live them. But they held on, barely, and that is only the first narrowing. Because tens of thousands of years later, our own kind, modern humans, faced their own dangerous passage, when your ancestors finally left Africa to spread across the entire planet. Only a small group made the journey. A few thousand, perhaps fewer. Every person outside of Africa today, every European, every Asian, every Native American, every Pacific Islander, descends from that one small band of travelers who walked out and never came back. The geneticist Spencer Wells spent years tracing this journey, following the trail of tiny changes in DNA like footprints across the map of the world. And the pattern he found tells the same story again and again. The further a population lives from Africa, the less genetic variety it carries. As if humanity spilled out of one narrow doorway, and each step away from the door meant carrying a little less of the original whole. You are the descendant of the ones who squeezed through, the bold, the lucky, the survivors of a bottleneck you never knew existed. So why does none of this feel true? Why, when you look at the sea of faces in a crowded street, does it seem obvious that humanity is vast and ancient and endlessly diversified? Because you're looking at the wide part of the hourglass, the part after the neck. In just the last few thousand years, your species exploded. From that thin, surviving trickle, humanity poured outwards and multiplied from a few million to hundreds of millions, to billions in a blink of evolutionary time. The crowd came back so fast and so completely that it erased the memory of how close it all came to ending. But the fingerprints of the bottleneck are still on you. They are in the strange sameness of human DNA. They are in the way a whole continent can share a genetic quirk that traces back to a single ancient traveler. They are in the fact that your species, for all its billions, is one of the least genetically diverse large animals on the planet. You are not proof of humanity's ancient strength. You are proof of how narrowly it survived. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Every one of those survivors was a real person. Not a statistic, not a dot on a chart. Each one woke every morning into a dangerous world, found food, feared the dark, loved their children, and somehow, against staggering odds, lived long enough to pass on the tiny thread that eventually became you. Skip one link, one single child who didn't survive one single winter, and you are gone. Not changed, gone, never born at all. You exist because a chain hundreds of thousands of links long never once broke. Not in the bottleneck 900,000 years ago. Not in the long walk out of Africa. Not through every plague, famine, and freeze in between. Every single ancestor, all the way down, survived long enough to pass you forward. The odds against that are almost beyond imagining, and yet here you are. So think about what this means for the ordinary stranger you'll pass tomorrow. That person waiting at the crossing, the one on the far side of the world you'll never meet. Trace both your lines back far enough and they meet, in the same small band, the same struggling thousand, the same handful of survivors who refuse to let the thread go quiet. Every human you will ever see, in the truest possible sense, your distant family, walking a world their ancestors nearly didn't live to see. There's something almost unbearably tender in that. You spend your life feeling separate, one small person among billions of strangers, but you're not separate at all. You are a leaf on a tree whose roots all twist back to the same tiny, terrified, tenacious group of survivors, standing together in the narrow neck of the hourglass, keeping the whole future of humanity alive without ever knowing they were doing it. Open the map on your phone one more time. Imagine all those 8 billion faces spread across the world again. It still feels like humanity has always been vast, always been safe, always been sure of itself. But now you know the truth. Every one of those faces is the far end of an unbroken thread that was nearly cut. You are not one of billions who were always meant to be. You are one of the lucky few who made it through the neck, carrying a whole world of people who never came. And the only question that ever mattered is what you choose to do with a survival that was never, ever guaranteed.